Hello and welcome, my friends and viewers, to the newest episode of Legendlore, where I draw and talk about monsters, characters, gods, and other things from D&D 5th edition, all while giving a small but quickly digestible history about them. Together we'll go over their history in the game, how they're utilized in the modern edition, and how you guys can utilize them in your own games. Today we're going to be going over one of my favorite D&D villains and characters, Orcus, the Demon Lord of Undeath. For a quick overview, Orcus' alignment is chaotic evil. He rules over the abyssal realm of Thanatos, which is the 333rd layer of the abyss. His profane symbol is the head of a horned goat, or his wand, which is a stick with a skull seated atop it. And his common worshippers are usually demons, sentient undead, necromancers, nihilists, and gluttons. In terms of his appearance, Orcus was depicted as a very large humanoid, often with the immense build of a strong man. He also had the head of a ram's skull, boar-like tusks, thick furry legs with cloven hooves, black membranous wings, and a barbed, poison-tipped tail. Due to his stance as the Demon Lord of Undeath, it is often believed that Orcus' flesh and bone is constantly rotting and regrowing all the time, hinting at his constant straddling of the line between life, death, and undeath. When it comes to his base personality, like most Demon Lords, Orcus was a nihilistic and hateful individual, particularly for the concept of life and living and the noise that such activities created. He was also known to be a master strategist and torturer, believing that until all things were dead or undead, he could truly never achieve a semblance of peace. Orcus was also known to be excessively gluttonous, gathering all sorts of food and delicacies from various places of the multiverse for him to taste and savor. This sometimes included the blood of living creatures, keeping in with the vampiric tendencies of his undead affinity. As I said before, Orcus controlled the 333rd layer of the abyss known as Thanatos, a barren wasteland filled with broken necropoles and hordes of naturally occurring undead, if that could even be considered a thing. It bore the bone-meal desert of Oblivion's End, from which Orcus ruled in his bone-formed palace of Everlost. Now, the concept of a desert made entirely out of bone meal and filled with undead makes for a very interesting concept to run, and it kinda makes me think of the desert wasteland right before the fight with Uncle Gale in Dark Souls 3. Another bit of inspiration for Thanatos can actually be the Soul Cairn from Skyrim, considering it's being filled with skeletons and other forms of spiritual and monstrous undead. I think it could definitely make for a very interesting final area for your players to engage in, at least in higher tier play. Now, in regards to Orcus' very storied and lengthy history, he began life as a powerful spellcaster before dying a death so unremarkable that's not even included in his lore. From there, he clawed his way up the evolutionary ranks before becoming a Balor demon, before finally ascending to the rank of Demon Lord of the Abyss. It is during this time that Orcus was believed to have allied with fellow demon lords Demogorgon and Baphomet, working together to overthrow Oboxob, the first prince of demons whose name I'm pretty sure I didn't pronounce correctly, before plunging into a lengthy, squabbling war over who would end up succeeding him, which is still going on to this day. From here, Orcus would be served by many faithful devotees, such as Zangui the Witch King, to Dorasane the King of Ghouls, to even the Lich and future God of Secrets, Vecna. Orcus was also believed to have been slain by the drow goddess Kiransili, who erased his name in history and seized control over Thanatos, his plane of the abyss. However, Orcus' sheer raw power was so great that his essence eventually reformed into a new entity, a shadowy mass of negative energy and pure evil known only as Tenebris. Seeking the wand of Orcus in hopes of reclaiming more of his lost power, Tenebris consumed and destroyed everything it touched, discovering powerful magics and using it to scourge across many planes of existence, such as the Modrons and Kiransili's own faithful, even being responsible for the death of the Modrons' creator, Primus. It wasn't until one of Orcus' few remaining priests conducted a powerful recollection ritual that Tenebris became Orcus once again, reclaiming control over his abyssal throne and shedding his maligned form into a vestige, rumored to still be wandering the many planes of existence to be called upon by its few warlocks, such as the demi-plane of dread known as Barovia. Tenebris is actually a character you can meet in the Curse of Strahd module, or at least semi-talk to and form a pact with because he's otherwise contained. In terms of his abilities, Orcus' powers were heavily varied, but mostly remained tied to his domain over undeath and necromancy as a whole. He was able to grant meager powers to warlocks, and summon undead by the score with little effort. Orcus was also believed to be able to see and sense through the eyes of any Bodak, extremely powerful soul-sucking undead sort of elementals, as well as be able to destroy phylacteries of liches at will and enslave their souls if they displeased him. In terms of direct combat, Orcus was known to use his wand as both a casting focus and as a club, beating enemies senseless while being able to absorb and ignore tremendous amounts of damage due to his bulky, towering form. Non-magical weapons would literally rot to nothing if they touched him, and he was immune to any attempts at enchantment, charm, or fear-inducing effects. His wings offered him flight, his tail was barbed with necrotic poisons, and I could also imagine that his constant rotting and unrotting skin would leave him with a nauseating toxic stench. Of course, this is all predicated on the idea that you should never have your PCs fight a demon lord directly, as their power is simply too great to deal with, especially on their home plane. Fighting an aspect in the material plane, where death might just see them sent back to the abyss? Maybe. But directly? Not so. In terms of his relationships, Orcus's greatest enemies consisted mostly of other demon lords, such as Demogorgon and Grotst, with whom he has warred over control of the abyss with. But by far his greatest foe was the goddess of death, the Raven Queen, whose dominion he flouts with the use of both undead and necromancy. Many believe that he wishes to supplant her in controlling the dominion of death and souls, and we actually have covered the Raven Queen in a previous video linked in the description below. In terms of his allies, Orcus has been known to ally with the demon lord Yeenagu from time to time, even though the demon lord of Knowles did steal his devout worshipper Dorasaint from him. He's also partnered with powerful spellcasters such as Asirak, wielder of the Sphere of Annihilation, the witch Igwilf, or Tasha as many know her, and of course, as I said before, the necromancer turned lich turned god, Vecna. On top of that, Orcus has also been known to have sired half-fiend children with mortal women, who were often found by his cult, cultivated until birth, and then sacrificed to Orcus after the child was born. This could be a very interesting aspect to explore if you want your world to be a little bit more dark fantasy and horror or gritty. Now, in terms of his clergy and worship, Orcus's faith was never really centralized, with several small cults separately acting on their own. Members usually included humans, orcs, ogres, giants, goblinoids, a small group of red dragons, and of course, necromancers and aspiring liches and vampires. Most of these cults were usually led by high priests who were known as Skull Lords, not to be mistaken for the three-headed undead monster, but it could be interesting to have one rule over an Orcus cult for the players to defeat. In order to become a Skull Lord, a follower of Orcus had to venture into his abyssal realm of Thanatos, and then successfully gain control over a horde of its naturally occurring undead, before bringing it back through the planes to be unleashed upon the material plane. Failure to do so caused said follower to be slain and rise up as a lich under Orcus's direct control, serving him in the realm of Thanatos for all eternity. Notable followers of Orcus included the aforementioned Dorasaint, the Ghoul King and the first ghoul to ever exist, who ended up becoming a vassal to Yeenagu after being conquered and taken from Orcus's service, Qus, an elder evil who was once believed to be a priest of Orcus, who now unleashes undead and the spawn of Qus upon the world. There's also Senelian, the succubus queen of whispers, who rules the 71st layer of the abyss and claims Orcus to be her patron. And then of course there's also Calarol the Vile, scion of Orcus, from the D&D adventure Keep on the Shadowfell, who, because of Akovil, has become one of my favorite villains to run. Now regarding Orcus's spiritual artifacts, his most well-known one is of course the classic Wand of Orcus, a rod topped with a skull that was capable of killing any living creature, no matter the strength, age, or power level. When wielded in melee, the wand often functioned as a +6 holy chaotic heavy mace in older editions, which would probably be translated to a +3 weapon in the modern 5th edition. Anyone who touched the wand that wasn't a demon or undead had a chance to potentially die immediately. It is also said to have been destroyed several times, but so long as Orcus remains living, or unliving, the wand will reform eventually, given usually around a century of time to do so. Other artifacts tied to him include the Orcus Sword, a demonic blade that Orcus wielded as a Baelor demon before his ascension to demon lordship, and the Crown of Narfell, which he used to corrupt mortal rulers with demonic influence. It was destroyed and then eventually reforged into the Shadow Crown of Vendu. And these two items can both be potentially interesting rewards to give to your players after they discover Orcus cults, or even potentially find them in a dungeon. Now, when I like to run Orcus at the table, the Demon Lord of Undeath to me is a little bit more than just some fiend who decided to take necromancy as his domain upon ascendancy to abyssal rulership. Rather, in my own homebrew way of doing things, Orcus is not just the Demon Lord of Undeath. Orcus in his mortal life was an extremely powerful wizard, but he was also actually the creator of the necromancy school of magic. And it is for this breaking of the cycle of life and death that he was sentenced to the abyss for eternal torment, possibly by the Raven Queen, which helps illustrate and give origins to his enmity of her. Due to lichdom not being a cultivated ritual just yet, considering necromancy was just created, Orcus was forced to dwell in the lower planes as a lowly demon, but his mortal ambition remained bound to him, as did his command over the undead and the necromancy that puppeted them. As such, Orcus did the unthinkable, and began to bring the raised dead from the material plane to the abyss, swelling his armies and his power over centuries until one day he arose to the station of Demon Lord. With all this in mind, all casters in my world who practice necromancy, even those that worship other gods, passively give Orcus power due to his role as the progenitor of the school. As such, he is immensely powerful, almost godlike, but manages to circumvent forced apotheosis, and thus forced expulsion from the lower planes, by not being the object of worship directly, save for those small cults that he cultivates himself. With that said, Orcus, despite his great size and strength, is a master wizard and tactician, and in this respect, I like to sort of fuse him with another D&D god of Undeath, Vel-Sharun, creating a master manipulator whose legend as the first necromancer has long since been buried by the gods, out of the hope that no mortal would attempt to try and break another cosmic aspect through their own ambition. I also like to give Orcus a secondary aspect that is actually drawn from his real-life counterpart, Orcus, a god of the underworld from both Etruscan and Roman myth. This Orcus is a punisher of oathbreakers, often being the one to claim their soul when they break their respective pledges. As such, I like to use this to explain why both Oathbreaker paladins can wield necromantic powers, and why Death Knights end up becoming Death Knights, being bound in undeath to their armor as a curse for breaking their oaths. In my world, many believe that this is because Orcus, in his mortal life, promised to maintain the balance of life and death, only to break it once he discovered the potential usefulness in developing necromancy. In regards to his time as Tenebrous, I love to imagine that Tenebrous was Orcus without his arrogance or tactical mind, functionally acting as a sort of negative energy elemental that consumed any and all living things in its path. It's exemplary of the fact that without his cunning and self-restraint and his meticulous plans, Orcus would end up running rampant and be the doom of many powerful entities in the great cosmic universe of Dungeons & Dragons, as he was with Primus. As such, when I roleplay Orcus, I imagine him with a deep bellowing voice and speaking with a slow, matter-of-fact candor, very similar to someone like Darkseid from DC or maybe even Tywin Lannister from Game of Thrones. I know I reference him a lot in terms of my character's depictions, but he's just a very useful character to draw on. Orcus would carry a very ancient grandioseness to him, and a curiosity to the actions of mortals who managed to find their way into his sights, often searching for unmet promises or broken oaths, or the same sort of ambition that allowed him not to just ascend to the rank of Demon Lord, but invent a whole new school of magic and defy death itself. With all this in mind, here are a couple of classes and subclasses that I feel align with Orcus very well to use for PCs or for NPCs if you're a Dungeon Master. For Artificers, the Armorer can forge armor from bone and sinew taken from undead corpses, each plate sort of being inscribed with necromantic runes. For Barbarians, the Zealot can be fueled by Orcus's promise of immortality, which can translate to their difficulty of being killed on the battlefield. Meanwhile, Ancestral Guardians can be bound to ghosts or spirits that are in service to Orcus and originate from Thanatos, rather than ancestors from their own bloodline. For Bards, the College of Spirits can obviously channel the whispers of undead souls from Thanatos to aid the party and torment their enemies. For Clerics, the Death and Blood domain are visually apt, the former being an obvious pick for an Orcus Cleric, while a Blood Cleric can use blood to control others rather than having to manipulate their corpses upon death, making domination just that much easier. For Druids, the Circle of Spores and Blighted can both warp nature to a necrotic wasteland, fertile only for the growth of fungus or vermin who feast on rot. For Fighters, the Echo Knight can be particularly interesting, with the Echo Knight's echo being the soul or ghost of the fighter, leaving their physical body behind as a shell to kind of fight in a twisted, puppet-like nature. For Monks, a Warrior of the Long Death would be obsessed with mastering death and striking bargains with Orcus to transcend it. For Paladins, the Oathbreaker is a very obvious pick, given my portrayal of Orcus as a patron and ruler of Oathbreakers, as well as the Oath of Conquest, which can spread Orcus's rulership by slaughtering the living and raising them as undead soldiers. For Rangers, the Swarm Keeper guides swarms of corpse-eating vermin, which can leave behind only skeletons that can then be raised and piloted by said swarms. I can actually imagine a Swarm Keeper being a very apt lieutenant for a Necromancer villain. For Rogues, the Phantom is once again an obvious pick, being able to pass through walls and consume souls to use for their trinkets. For Sorcerers, the Evil Divine Soul can originate from a corrupted spark of Orcus's own essence, maybe even drawing upon his time as Tenebrous to fuel their magic. Meanwhile, Shadow Sorcery can be able to draw literal undead powers from Thanatos itself, rather than the Shadowfell, and can even have an origin of being a sorcerer who attempted to become a Skull Lord, but failed and managed to escape. For Warlocks, the Fiend is beyond obvious, as well as the Undead and Hexblade patrons, the Hexblade being especially interesting if you have a weapon formed from a bone shard of the Wand of Orcus, which grows in power with each soul consumed. And finally, for Wizards, Necromancy, obviously being the school that Orcus developed in my understanding of the character, as well as Blood Magic. Here are a couple of magic items that I personally believe would be great loot for Orcus-themed dungeons, or even rewards that your players can find off of Orcus-themed enemies, be they cultists, undead, or demons. And finally, for our homebrew magic item in this video, we have Pare. Pare is a vestige short sword that requires attunement by a spellcaster, and deals 1d6 slashing or piercing damage on a successful hit, as well as additional necrotic damage depending on its vestige level. The necrotic damage listed also applies to any necrotic damage dealt by the wielder's spells, such as Inflict Wound or Vampiric Touch. As a vestige, this magic item grows in power the more that the wielder uses it, and the more in line that they are with the item's motives, as the item is sentient. As such, Pare is neutral evil, and seeks to consume the blood of any creature it can, absorbing the pre's knowledge to benefit the wielder or itself. It doesn't speak, rather it exudes its intent to the wielder through malevolence towards creatures it wishes to kill, but it will often grow ill of compassion or charity. In its dormant form, Pare is a +1 weapon, deals an additional 1d4 necrotic damage, and gets access to the Legendlore ability. Awakened, it becomes a +2 weapon and deals 2d4 necrotic damage, and gains access to its Deep Thirst ability. And finally, in its exalted form, Pare becomes a +3 weapon, deals 3d4 additional necrotic damage, and gets access to the Kneel and Wither ability. We're going to go over each one of those now. Legendlore is an ability that you can use 3 times a day. The wielder of this weapon can extract information about an enemy that they have damaged with this weapon as a bonus action. They can choose to learn one of the following aspects: damage resistances, damage vulnerabilities, damage immunities, condition immunities, or save proficiencies. Alternatively, the wielder can also use this to extract knowledge from the creature, and instead of learning one of the previous aspects listed below, can gain proficiency in a skill that it is not already proficient in. This lasts until the wielder uses Legendlore again to gain a new skill proficiency. Creatures who don't have blood or are of the construct and undead creature types are immune to this effect, and the target must be alive for this ability to initially work. Next we have Deep Thirst, which you can use 2 times a day. Upon dealing damage to a creature with a spell, you regain an amount of HP equal to half the spell's damage, but if the spell's damage type is necrotic, you instead gain the whole damage amount as HP. The creature must suffer the damage in order for this effect to occur, so any resistances or immunities would cause this ability not to function. And finally, we have Wither and Kneel, which you can only use once a day. You target a creature with a soul rune, marking them for death. The target must then make a wisdom saving throw against your spellcasting DC, and upon failure, will become vulnerable to necrotic damage for the rest of the encounter. If the creature is immune to necrotic damage, this instead removes the vulnerability, making them suffer the necrotic damage as normal. I've included the item stat block and everything else in the description below, and with that, that's our coverage of Orcus, the Demon Lord of Undeath, everybody. I want to thank all of you guys for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please like, share, and subscribe, and press the little bell icon to be notified of future videos. And if you guys want a chance to vote on upcoming content, as well as see works in progress of the drawings as I develop them, you can follow me on social media, as well as also subscribe to my Substack for the script version of these videos, which also have all the same materials. DMs, please let me know how you guys have actually worked or used Orcus in your previous campaigns, and players, let me know of your encounters or experiences when fighting him and his hordes of undead, as well as what else you guys would like to see in upcoming videos. But until then, I'll see you guys next time.